Shalom Aleichem. This is a tribute to Rabbi Avraham, Yehoshua, Twerski, Olav Shalom, Rabbi Dr. Abraham Twerski, who I personally knew and am indebted to. There's much to say about him. He was a man that was larger than life, but I'll just share some things that I believe are a little different than the other interviews and published accounts of his life. In 1994, I published my first book, Your Better Self, and this was after the Rebbe's Istalkos, the Rebbe passed away already. I asked Rabbi Dr. Nissim Mendel for a haskama, for approbation for the book. And he told me, he wrote to me that in Beis Harav, they don't give haskamas. So he considered himself part of Beis Harav, and that's a discussion for another time. So I asked Rabbi Dr. Abraham Twerski, and he immediately gave me a beautiful letter. The book's about the self-improvement based on the Alter Rebbe's sheet of Amecha of Tanya, and we cover such issues of loneliness and friendliness and guilt and things like that. And Dr. Twerski wrote me a beautiful letter endorsing and saying that he wishes his audience would appreciate those thoughts. So I'm personally very indebted to the Rabbi Twerski for doing this. But it's not about me, it's not about the letter, it's not about the book, it's about him. He was born Erev Sukkos, I believe, Tov Reish Tzadik Aleph, which is 1930. He passed away this past Sunday. So he was 90 years old, and this week, his 90th book is coming out. So it's a very interesting hashgacha pratis. Rabbi Twerski was, in a sense, an iconoclast. He did not accept the standard established attitudes and approaches to Yiddishkeit and Chasidischkeit, but at the same time, he was a very great Chassid and a very Frum Jew and a big Talmud Chacham and a great Torah scholar. His parents came to America in 1927, and in 1929 they moved to Milwaukee, and he was born in Milwaukee. His mother was the sister of Rabbi Shlomo Halberstam, the Bava Rebbe. So the Bava Rebbe was his uncle. His father was known as the Hornostipler Rebbe, or they used to call him the Milwaukee, from Milwaukee. But he was a grandson of the Hornostipler dynasty within the Chernobyl Greater Dynasty. And that particular avenue in Chernobyl comes from the Cherkasser. And the Cherkasser was a son-in-law by the Mitteler Rebbe. So Rabbi Dr. Twerski comes from the Mitteler Rebbe. The Twerskis are Chernobyl children, grandchildren, great-grandchildren, and there's probably thousands of them. A very, very prestigious family amongst the Jewish nation. And Rabbi Dr. Twerski did something that was a trailblazing thing. I want to talk about several things that he did in his life that were trailblazing, revolutionary, and iconoclastic. And one thing is, the first thing maybe, is that after he learned in yeshiva and was the son of a Rebbe and wore the long frock with the shtreimel and everything else, he goes to university. He goes to university after telling me in an interview that's printed in my book, Conversations with the Rebbe, that he got permission from the Stipler Goin, Rabbi Kanievsky, to go to university for parnasa purposes, and he was already married. I just came back from Shiva here in Borough Park, the whole family sitting in Shiva, And I heard that when he was sitting in university, a woman comes over to him and she says, "It's been 3.5 weeks. You haven't spoken a word to me. You're so unsocial." And Rabbi Dr. Twerski looked up at her and he said, "And so it shall remain." The idea of mixing the genders in college is, in there, from the way the Twerskis and the Bovers see it, the worst thing. And it is. The issue of the philosophies, Apicursus, heresy. I just heard another relative, Rabbi Yaakov Yosef Halberstam, say at the Shiva, that wasn't the big concern. And the concern was taruvos, right? Mixing the genders. And Rabbi Dr. Twerski was strict about it. He remained a chassid, a Frum Jew in college and university. In the 50s in America, psychology, psychotherapy, psychiatry became very big. The famous Brooklyn psychiatrist, the psychologist, William Maslow, became very popular with his philosophies and Yechidus and ideologies. And it was an up-and-coming thing, and people were gravitating to that field. Rabbi Twerski was the first, as far as I know, the first Frum Chasidic psychiatrist of prominence. And this is a trailblazing thing. Because the fact is, we need such people who are so religious, so frum, so Chasidish, so Rebbish, and for them to do that field, to help people. He had Yechidus with the Rebbe in the interview that I had with him. He talks about the Yechidus he had with the Rebbe. The Rebbe said to him, "Rabbi Twerski, maybe you move here to New York and open your practice here." And he said to the Rebbe, "Because so many people need you here." The Rebbe said, "I know." The Rabbi Twerski said, "I know, but I'll be overwhelmed. I won't have any day and night." And the Rebbe said, "You're right. You won't have any day and night." But he wasn't a chassid of the Rebbe. He was a great admirer, and he knew what kind of person the Rebbe was. But he wasn't his chassid. So at the end, he did not listen, and he settled in a much quieter community, Pittsburgh. And he made a great impact there and world over. And I know myself, people here in Borough Park, Frum people, Hasidim, who he saved their marriages and he saved their lives from addictions, drug addictions, alcohol addictions, and all kinds of issues. He was the address. And they trusted him because of who he was and where he came from and everything else. So that's one trailblazing issue that he brought. He was the first to navigate that field, and he did a very good job at it. The second thing that he did was he brought the niggin Hoshea Amecha to the Jewish people. A niggin that is sung today at any and all chasanas, at any events. It doesn't have a party it belongs to. It was composed by him while he was davening Shachris one morning, and he said the words Hoshea Amecha. And it's interesting, they used to call him Shia, although his name was Avraham Yeshua, they used to call him Shia. So when he said Hoshea Amecha, this tune fell into his head, and he composed it. And then in Tammuz of 1960, at his youngest brother's wedding, Aaron, who became later a professor of law at Hofstra University, he sang the song, and everyone sang together, and it took off. And he heard reports back that it's an Israeli song, it's a Chabad song, it's this, it's that. Our Rebbe took such liking and love to it, it's incredible. And my friend Rabbi Michael Zelikson has put out about 4 WhatsApp messages with the whole history of the Rebbe and Hoshea Amecha that's worth listening to. But to put it succinctly, the Rebbe used Hoshea Amecha to help Russian Jews leave Russia, to help situations in Eretz Yisrael. So the niggin Hoshea Amecha became a staple of our Rebbe and Lubavitch Chassidim. The one who composed it and didn't take credit for it and didn't say you can't sing it and it's copyright was Rabbi Twerski. So much so that I just saw the copy of his tzava. His son took it out, and he left over the instructions there should be no hespedim, no eulogies at his funeral, and they should sing the Nigun Yeshidus Amecha because it brought so much simcha to Yidden. And that's what they did. And that's another point. No hespedim. In the Chernobyl culture and in the culture of the Chassidim, there's hespedim, there's eulogies. There was no eulogy by his wedding. And not because of Corona, the police might come and shut down the wedding, the funeral, etc. Because he realized, and is teaching us, that hespedim are a loaded gun. Sometimes it's necessary and a good thing, and sometimes it's bad. Hespedim, eulogies, bring a lot of narishkeit many times, and babamaises, baloney. And for the neshama, especially at the time, before it's buried, while it's buried, it's very, very important to say the emes, the truth. And he instructed no hespedim, and rather, he wants to go back to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, he wants to return to God with the nigun that brought joy to Yidden Yeshidus Amecha, something so powerful. Another trailblazing thing that Rabbi Twerski did over his years was he was able to bring together in a way the Jewish and non-Jewish worlds of psychotherapy and psychiatry. For example, he partnered with Charles Schultz of Peanuts, and he put out some books, and it was really another way for therapy. But the way it was done, it opened it up for everyone, not just for Jewish people. And that's another thing about him. His 90 books, some of the early ones, I remember using them. One book is Generation to Generation. In Los Angeles, when I was there and giving lectures, I used this book heavily to prepare because it had stories, anecdotes, and self-improvement lessons. And it's a classic. There's no other book like that in that field, Generation to Generation. So his work extended way beyond, the traditional publishing houses and all of that. And talking about his books, of late, probably about the last 20 years, he published a book on abuse. And the ordinary, regular publishers didn't want to publish it because it would, bring to the attention that there's abuse in the Frum community. He published it anyway. He got it done. He was a trailblazer. He wasn't scared. He wasn't scared whether they'll stop publishing his books. He had to make a statement because abuse was getting out of control. Marital abuse, parental abuse, and of late, internet abuse, addictions. He spoke out against it. And that's a trailblazing thing. A third thing that he was innovative in is that he wore Techeilis. He wore the tzitzis with the blue thread, believing that they've identified today the Techeilis that the Torah says you should wear. Now, for him to do that was pretty innovative, pretty risky, because the Chernobyl Chassidim don't do that. We know that the Mitteler Rebbe in Poland came, but there was a lot of flack and a lot of disputes, and most people said he was wrong. Well, Rabbi Twerski, based on new evidence of the last 20, 30 years, was convinced it is the correct color, and he wore it. And I think that's also so trailblazing, not to be afraid of what his own family, the Bavavers and the Skverers and the Chernobylers, what are they all going to say about Rabbi Avraham Yehoshua, the son of a Rebbe, the grandson, great-grandson of the Shakasser and the Mitteler Rebbe? What are they going to say about him? He didn't care. Why? Because this is what he came to. Right or wrong, but this is what he came to. A fourth area is where he stood out, is in his love for Eretz Yisrael, making Aliya, when his family didn't go along. They didn't come to Eretz Yisrael. And I'm mentioning it because he says it on an interview that it bothers him that, kind of none of his kids, grandkids, whatever. But he felt compelled. He felt that Yid needs to be now in Eretz Yisrael. And he got up and he moved to Eretz Yisrael. And that's an outstanding feature of a person who shows that what he believes in, he does. You want to come along, you come along. You don't want to come along, don't come along. And I think we need to relate to that and understand. Again, I'm not proposing everyone should move to Eretz Yisrael or not. That's not the point here. The point is what he did in face of kind of opposition, non-compliance, non-interest, no interest. He did it anyway. The warmth of the person, the intelligence of this person, he left for Klal Yisrael so many works that will continue for years and years to come. And when a person, it's still the Shiva, and we think about a person like Rabbi Avraham Yehoshua Twerski, and the legacy that he leaves, and the family he comes from. And I met at Shiva children, his brother, grandchildren, relatives. It's so wonderful to see the Chasidic tradition in full force. There wasn't an iota of a compromise. Okay? And over the years, living in Pittsburgh, he became very close to Rabbi Shalom Posner and Rabbi Yecheskel Derin and others, but those two in particular. Rabbi Posner, took over the yeshiva in the 40s. And Achet Mim of Pittsburgh is a Shem Dover, is a beautiful yeshiva. Rabbi Twerski became the president of the shul. As part of the shul in Pittsburgh, of the Lubavitch Yeshiva, he gave a Tanya shir every morning. And he told me this, and I want to really, listen to this. Listen to this. I told him when I interviewed him in 1996, and the interview is online at crownheights.info, or in my book, Conversations with the Rebbe. I interviewed him, and I said, I heard that you don't allow someone who didn't go to the mikveh to come to your shir. And he looked me straight in the eye and he says, 100%, absolutely. Tanya on mikveh? Tanya without going to the mikveh? Zois loy, no way. Now, I don't think that's the Lubavitcher approach, but Rabbi Twerski is not a Lubavitcher. And let's focus on the positive aspect. Tanya without going to the mikveh? You know what Sefer Tanya Kadisha is? The Holy Tanya? To him, this was the paradigm of godliness, the epitome of divinity. Another thing he told me, that he was translating at the time, Mesilas Yesharim, and it eventually came out. And I said to him, Rabbi Twerski, after discussing, it's in the interview, some concepts in Tanya, which was fascinating about the two levels of tzaddik, two levels of Rasha, and the Beinani, and he put it into psychological terms. They're very, very different than I ever heard it before, and I believe unique for its for his explanation. So I said to Rabbi Twerski, you have to write a book, a sefer on Tanya, translate Tanya in your own words. He said, I have to get to that. I don't believe he ever got to that, so he got to that. So my appeal